All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 58 of the Coffee Squad podcast. Welcome back, Jake.
Thanks, bud. It's good to be back.
Good to see you after you've been gallivanting all over the country. And today we are joined by a special guest, author, trial lawyer, pilot, engineer, painter, just a man of all expertise, Brett Godfrey. How you doing this morning, sir?
Acclaimed author.
Acclaimed author. I said author.
We were just talking right before the show with Brett, like, when does he find time to sleep? And if you go to his websites and you look at, like, first you look at what he's flown, you look at what he's done as a lawyer, you look at what he's done as an engineer, and then as an author and then a painter. I was looking at the some of your paintings, Brett, and I was like, man, these are really good. I like them. So is there anything you don't do, Brett, that isn't amazing or awesome?
Well, everything I do has room for improvement, but I don't knit.
Yet. So it's pretty remarkable reading your bio and learning about you and perusing some of your book and reading some of the first little outline of your new book that's about to come out. So glad. Thank you for joining our show. Especially at the early hours in Hawaii.
Yes. We set this up. I was not aware you were going to be in Hawaii, or else I would have maybe suggested a more appropriate time. But hey, this is the Coffee Squad, so what better time to talk about coffee than first thing in the morning, right?
You bet.
What are you drinking today, Jake?
Oh, me. I'm drinking some Prove It ketones. So look, I've been doing the keto diet, kind of went off a little bit, but even when I'm off, I drink the Prove It natural ketones. It's a Mai Tai drink, so I like that. And of course, my Waterloo sparkling water, man. Yep. So not much of a coffee drinker, but Brett, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking some Pike Place right now.
Nice.
Okay.
We're in the room.
Okay.
Excellent.
Awesome. Are you a coffee connoisseur, Brett?
I am to a degree. I don't go quite as overboard as some of my friends do, but yeah, I am.
Yeah, unlike Will here. Will is a connoisseur, and he does go not a little bit overboard, but way overboard with it. So go ahead, Will. Wow us and read to us what you're drinking today.
It's just I went back to the Reveille by One Nation Coffee. They're a small roaster out of Charleston, South Carolina. Phil was on last week. He's part owner and roasted this batch for me. It's just light roast, good flavor, not too acidic, not too bold. It's a good all around coffee. Nice, bright, light roast in the morning.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into Brett. I mean, we have time, but not a lot of time to go over everything he's done, and I think it's quite amazing. So let's jump into this topic here and get this rolling.
Yes. So, Brett, why don't you tell us a little bit about your life and how it kind of inspired you to write Black Sunrise? Because kind of listening to some other stuff and doing research, it seemed like you spent a lot of time and due diligence writing this book. I know reading it amazed me how descriptive and just thorough you are in your description. So just maybe if you can kind of expand on that and tell us how everything's came to be.
Well, happily, thank you very much. Black Sunrise is a fiction novel. But I wanted it to be the kind of novel that readers would say, wow, I learned something in this. My favorite writers are good at doing that. When I was younger, I just used to hang on between Tom Clancy novels, waiting for the next one to come out. And I had other readers that would put enough, and I don't like to use the word arcane because it has a boring context to it, but there was enough arcanery, in other words, specialized knowledge in the books that you sort of felt like not only are you entering a new world, but you're entering a new world and you're learning new things that are worth knowing. So I started off when I was much, much younger, and the idea behind the book, in those days it was called, it was really campy. It was called Shock Flash, and I was, a young man. I was 19 years old. And the idea was that I was focused on a weapon which was an electromagnetic pulse that could be set off from various nodes around the country simultaneously to basically disable the power grid and the computing grid and the internet. I knew about the internet as a concept even before it was popularized as a thing that everybody uses in this country. It was originally designed to provide scientific communication nodes between vital data centers in the event of nuclear war that wiped out our phone systems, but and our telegraph systems. But then I thought, yeah, this just isn't as plausible as I want it to be. So I spent a couple of years studying viruses, or I guess the science of virology, which is how viruses work. I looked at bacterias, but they don't have the robust lifespan, and they're not as transmissible. So I decided that my secret weapon had to be a virus. And then I spent about 5 years researching viruses on and off until I thought I knew enough to go ahead and plug that weapon in to the plot line and let it drive the plot line to a degree.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of spooky. Is almost foreboding of not saying that, this is a biological weapon, but the whole pandemic that has happened over the last year and a half, 2 years now, almost, it seems like it just little gypsy in you seeing the future.
Well, I'm not alone. People kind of joke with me and they say, you finished the book in 2019 before the word pandemic was on every lip in America, and certainly before COVID-19 was a known thing. But the truth is that it was almost inevitable. It was bound to happen that this would come along. It's just that the only thing that's surprising is how quickly after release of Black Sunrise, the COVID-19 virus became a global pandemic. So, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen again. But the question is simply timing, and predicting that in advance is difficult, although I have some thoughts about when the next thing is going to hit.
Well, let's hear the next. If you don't mind sharing, what are your thoughts? I mean, again, your book came out in 2019, a little bit about a pandemic. So what are your thoughts, I guess, with the next pandemic and anything that we can do?
Well, if we look at the history of human conflict, and we also look at the natural evolution of pathogens that are airborne or transmissible with these without direct physical contact between people, you can look at some events and start to plot the frequency of those things. And we've had deadly viruses on this planet longer than we've had people. But, we've all heard of Ebola or Zika virus or those things that we typically find in the continent of Africa. But, the debate that interests me significantly is whether or not COVID-19 was a man-made virus or a man-modified virus. We've had other coronaviruses on the planet for some time, which is why they don't just call it, COVID. But you remember SARS, severe adult respiratory distress syndrome, or SARS, that came out about 5 years ago. That's just another form of COVID.
Yep.
And people forget that because they don't know the history or what the words mean. As a society, one of the things that's interesting and disappointing to me is we've sort of picked up the idea that the currency we use, our intellectual currency, is now reduced to sound bites. And fake news is based on who's got the most powerful soundbite, and sound bites and headlines that end with question marks are things that we should be sort of wary of in this world, because they tend not to convey useful information. I read my Apple News on my iPad every morning, and any headline that ends with a question mark, I don't read it, because it's been clear to me that that's going to be junk news, if not fake news. Because the people have an idea that they haven't got backup for to make into a real news article, so they just speculate on some scary question without any background knowledge or data. But here we sit, every American has been affected profoundly by COVID-19. And we all know that it was detected with patient zero in China, a laboratory that does biological weapons research for the People's Republic of China in Wuhan, China. And how did that happen to be such a coincidence? Well, we heard after a while, no, it's not from the weapons lab, it's from the jungles, and we have different types of animals that maybe carried it, and they came into rare but unavoidable contact with humans and spread the virus that way. But the other side of the coin is it got into a person who worked in a weapons lab, and that's an odd fact. But keep in mind, COVID killed essentially less than 5% of the people that are infected, or something close to that, depending on which demographic you apply. And the people who got long haul COVID or symptoms that last for persistent periods of time, those scare the hell out of everybody. Scared the hell out of me. I've now had both of my shots. I've had some lively debates with anti-vaxxers that I know. But the point is that COVID was not terribly mutagenic, which means capable of changing its structure, and it's not terribly lethal. By way of example, the black sunrise virus in my book is 100% fatal.
Yep.
If you get it, it's going to stay quiet in your system for somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks while you spread it all over the place in what the scientists in the book call the marching phase, where the virus is marching. And then based on synchronicity of the DNA in the viral particle, it'll activate essentially all at once. So everybody that's been infected starts to drop all basically within a few days of each other, and then the virus times out, which gives the users of the virus a sort of a synthetic tool to use to create an artificial but highly controllable plague. Now that idea is very much on the drawing boards of various weapons labs, or it's hard to get a lot of inside data about what's happening at US AMRID, which is the Army research facility for bioweapons, in terms of both development and containment and response. But I think that if you can imagine a COVID virus that is not asymptomatic for 3 days, but is asymptomatic for 3 weeks, your R0 value, which is the contagion level for that virus, will be much, much higher. And then if the infection manifestations are not just, for most people, flu-like symptoms or cold-like symptoms, but actually a fairly rapid onset of death, you can visualize that a virus could be far more lethal than any nuclear weapon ever created on this planet.
Yep. Yeah. As you're talking, remind me of the Ebola outbreak a few years back. I was still in the military, but anyone going over to Africa, or if you had it, the containment, and it was almost a death sentence, if I remember correctly, with that. And then I think you bring up a great point with globalization. The way globalization is, you can jump on a plane anywhere you want, and within 24 hours be somewhere, around the globe within 24 hours. And so, as you're saying, Brett, if you have that you're asymptomatic, and for 24 hours you don't know it, but then 72 hours later you start presenting signs and symptoms. Well, everyone on that plane then, especially with the recycled air and everything else, yes, there's filters and everything, but crazy, it's crazy how pandemics work. I think you bring up a great point about data. And I always, I think with this pandemic, we've talked about this early on last year in the show with the pandemic, because it was hot and heavy. It still is a little hot and heavy subject, but you don't know what to believe. Whether you go on one news media site or the other news media site, you have doctors, that, one's telling you one thing and one's telling you another thing. And so I think as the average citizen, I'm speaking for myself here, it's hard to believe. I don't know what to believe.
Well, the things that are hard points that really are not debatable are scary enough. We have gene sequencing technology becoming easier and easier to acquire in places that are remote locations, third world countries, havens for terrorism. And the global mix of threat vectors is now so homogenous. And what I mean is all stirred in, it's all everywhere. And if you go back to World War II and you think about what was going on, where the world divided roughly into two broad camps, and and then eventually 3 as the Soviet Union started to become a Cold War enemy. But we kind of knew what everybody was doing. We knew who was friends and we knew who was foes. There were certainly exceptions to that, but at the end of the day, the Cold War was about us versus Russia on an espionage theater throughout the world. Now we have so many different destructive groups, and they are so mobile, and they are so much more equipped technologically than they were, say, 10 years ago. That it's very difficult to track where the threats are coming from. And I use that phrase threat vector, which is, it's a title of various novels out there that people have used. But what it really means is, where are the threats coming from and where are they going? And when we look at the number of terrorist organizations in the world that haven't grabbed headlines like ISIS or Al Qaeda, et cetera, and we look at what I think is important for people to understand, which are false flag operations, which means an attack or a threat, an infiltration of a cyber system or our health system that is designed to be attributed to someone other than who actually created it. That's what we call a false flag operation. There's many manifestations of it in the spy world and so forth, but the complexity of the threat matrix in this country is, in terms of where we are situated with respect to the rest of the world, and now internally. We have more and more acts of things that to me look exactly like domestic terrorism, and authorities sort of deny that because they're trying to quell the panic. You can imagine that if it came out reliably that China deliberately developed COVID-19 and deliberately released it on the world as a means of injecting economic instability into democratic societies without the tight controls that the communist regime imposes, you can imagine what the world response to that would be. It could be World War III. We could end up in a large-scale exchange of nuclear warheads at that point. So people are saying, no, it came from bats, it came from iguanas, et cetera, et cetera. Because it's not in the humankind's best interest to have people understand what that could mean.
Oh, absolutely. You look at the World Health Organization report, what that access to over there. My thing is, like, what are you hiding with anything, whether it's, something political here, anything, if there's obstruction, my first thing is, does it pass the smell test, and what are you hiding? So,
well, I think what's so scary about the biological, I don't know how advanced they are, Brett, maybe you can speak on this, but with it's like the new vaccines, they're mRNA, is that correct? Is it messenger RNA that they're attached to?
That's exactly.
And so we've learned how to do that type of stuff. And to me, that might be the next evolution of biological warfare, where they can create these viruses that attack certain genes in certain people and stuff like that. Am I crazy, or is that something that could possibly happen?
Well, the answer is purely speculative, because we don't know what the genetic structure of the next pandemic bug will be. But we focus now on the general structure of coronaviruses and the protein spikes that line the outer membrane of the viral particle. But if you seriously study any virology, you'll find out that the number of viral vectors that exist in the world is practically infinite. There are so many different types, and they can be classified into various species and genus and so forth. But the point is, the next big bug may be something that's more carefully engineered, like the Black Sunrise virus, and it may be completely fundamentally structurally different from COVID. Yeah. And the idea that we have so much literature available on the internet about the research that has been performed into coronavirus and how the vaccines were developed, that if you're a well-funded terrorist organization in the Mideast, or perhaps in Michigan, you end up with the ability to purchase equipment that can genetically sequence viral particles. It's on the black market, it's accessible, and and then the data, the research papers that are now publicly available or relatively accessible on password protected sites that are easy to get into. Man, the blueprints are out there. It's like the first time somebody found blueprints for the atom bomb on the internet. And people thought, oh my God, we're telling people how to make nuclear bombs. The only control there is fissile materials, like uranium, plutonium, and so forth. And that by trying to control those materials, we've avoided a situation where a dirty bomb or a suitcase bomb or a container ship with a container bomb has made it to the United States. That's another serious threat. And the third big threat that I see is organized crime, the infiltration of more and more large, well-organized groups of organized criminals, and they work with terrorist organizations in many instances. And for example, in the Soviet Union, which is the subject of my next book, Convergence of Demons, the growth of the Russian, Sicilian, Italian, and Mexican and Japanese mafias is frightening, and the way it's infiltrated society in Western nations, and the level of organization and the level of terror and violence that those organizations can levy. But the Solzhenitsynskoye Bratva in Russia is bigger than the Sinaloa cartel and the Yakuza put together.
Wow.
And there are branches of it in various places in the United States, mostly on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
But that is like an octopus, and it's I use the word hydrous in my book, and hydrous is mentioned in Black Sunrise, but we go into it in depth in Convergence of Demons. But the thought is that this nation has been infiltrated by so many different organized crime syndicates. We focus on the wall in Mexico because we're afraid of the Colombian and South American cartels and the Mexican cartels, and people know a little bit about that from watching Breaking Bad and so forth, in terms of how mules transport methamphetamine into the United States. But the Russian Bratvas are cozy with Putin, and he uses them as an instrumentality of his own policy. And because now we see this fairly persistent intermingling between Russian organized crime and Russian government and its policies in Syria and other places like that, you start to add that to the bioterror threat, and you see that we've got a perfect storm brewing in terms of recipes for global instability and mass destruction.
Yeah, it's kind of, man. You call me doom and gloom. That's scary, man. Going back, I'm sorry.
I have a concept I talk about in terms of technological threats, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is nanotechnology, genetic engineering, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. And when those four technologies converge, they're going to be like the first nuclear experiments, and the first time we built the bomb, we used it on ourselves. Yep. And so those things are all factoring into a global mix of what I call homogeneous threat environment.
As you're sitting there talking, Brett, I'm thinking, how much of that threat has turned into our own government? How much has it infiltrated our own government? And that's it's just a question thrown out there to think about, speculate on. But I always say trace the money. Doing intelligence work, if you trace the money, that's usually where you find your answers. So interesting.
Absolutely true. But if you look back at the events that led up to the Capitol siege on January 6th, I believe, there's been sporadic news coverage of the idea that China and Russia have both worked for much longer than we realize to start influencing American politics. And, the question of what really motivated Donald Trump when he started to foment that civil unrest what his goals were. People think, well, he's just an egomaniac and he couldn't bear the thought of losing. But there are people who have credible theories that are available on higher quality websites that was actually much more closely orchestrated by either Russia or China or both than anyone realizes. And again, we have this idea of avoiding public sentiment to massive warfare. So how much of that the American public is are allowed to know in order to avoid a reactionary event that could lead to a major global war? We just don't know that. But when I was in the Tulsa Air National Guard for a few years, and during that time, I had a chance to participate in some intelligence briefings that were not classified before I had my clearance. And one of the things I learned from that is that one of the perceived pitfalls of a democratic society is that people operate on a group think basis, and mass hysteria is highly contagious. And so the intelligence agencies and the government have this kind of dilemma. They walk this tightrope between how much transparency do we have in a democratic society to let the public know what's going on versus protecting people from themselves, because at the group think level, people operate on a reactive basis without a lot of analytical thought. Yeah. And so, that's a difficult policy decision to make. But when Donald Trump was in office, he tried to sort of play that card to his own personal advantage. And whether that's good or bad is highly debatable. And there are people that support what he did. At one time, I was one of those people. And then as things got weirder and stranger at the end, I started to think, how in the hell did I end up voting for this man? Because I did, I confess. But I deeply regretted that decision near the end of his term.
I was watching a movie a long time ago, and one of the things that's a line that kind of struck me. I think it's a good point, kind of what you were talking about. A person is smart, but people are dumb. And if you get people in a panic, it's a mess.
Yeah. I mean, mob psychology is a well-known phenomena. And the problem with galvanizing the country into polar extremes is that there is no middle ground, and middle ground is where we need to be.
Yep.
And I read an article yesterday about the appointment of moderates to the Supreme Court, and how we haven't been doing a lot of that. And the point is that the Supreme Court is now highly polarized, and I think that it's gotten to such a degree that it's not good for American justice. As a trial lawyer, I study trends and how juries react to things. I'm in a case right now where I'm involved in a police misconduct case involving an allegation of excessive force. So I've been studying everything I can about various events in the media. And I can tell you that if the case I'm involved with were to go to trial today, the odds of getting a fair jury are very slim.
I said that about the police officer up in Michigan or Minnesota right now. There's no way he has a fair and impartial jury, in my belief. I mean, you're more, that's more your world, but I can't believe that he's got a fair and impartial jury of his peers.
Well, people read these articles every day about, the Army lieutenant who was maced and kicked and treated like dog shit for no reason. And then, the female officer who, quote unquote, accidentally shot what she thought was a taser. She's screaming, taser, 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 but her body cam shows there's a Glock in her hand. Yep. And, how do you not know that? And then she decided to fire. And then as soon as she heard the report of her gun, which does not come through well on the body cam video, she goes, oh my God, I just shot the guy. And of course he dies. Yep. And people look at that. Is it possible that was a good faith mistake made by an officer who doesn't really handle pressure well? She sounds hysterical on the video. She's shrieking. She's screaming, taser, taser, taser. And she sounds like a complete wombat. And then next thing you know, she pounds around through the guy's torso. And he drives away and then subsequently expired. People are upset by those stories. But part of stabilizing a free society is to have an effective police force to fight crime. But if people don't trust the police, and today nobody trusts the police that I've surveyed or spoken with, except a small minority of people in the community where my cases go to trial right now these days. I try cases all over the country, and in fact, I've done work in 8 countries. But when I learn what people think, which is something you can learn by walking into a Walmart and striking up a conversation with a total stranger. That's a good way to keep your finger on the pulse of society, is go to Walmart and see how ordinary people live. And because trial lawyers sort of live in this effete world where they lose touch with people. And that's a deadly problem for a trial lawyer who loses touch with his own jury pools. But if you ask the average person, at that level of society, as opposed to going to somewhere like Neiman Marcus or upper echelon stores where you have higher educated, more wealthy people who, by the way, tend not to be on juries, you lose touch with the real heartbeat of America. And when we focus on what the average American thinks, they are being programmed, almost like having nanoprobes injected into their neck, by the Borg. I mean, these sound bites that we use as our intellectual currency in this country are designed to trigger reactive thought, not analytical thought.
I think that's part of the problem. What's going on right now, like you brought up earlier, is the news media and stuff like that. They only show a short clip most of the time, only the worst part of it, and they don't show all the events leading up. So everybody jumps to conclusions, gets fired up, and then it comes out later, but nobody's listening.
Well, you think about psychological operations, right? In warfare, for people not to think that that's not happening in our own country. I don't care if you're on the right or the left. If you're watching MSNBC or CNN, they're going to tell you their side of the story. If you watch Fox News or The Hill or any other right side publications out there, they're going to tell you their sides, and they're going to frame it to fit their narrative. And so I have this conversation with a lot of people. There's a internal war raging right now, in my opinion, across this country as to get their narrative out to whatever fits their political or whatever their ideology is out there. And I think it's extremely dangerous. I think it's absolutely sad when you go on social media and you hear of people calling for a civil war. I think that's absolutely sad and disgusting. I've been to combat numerous times. That's the last thing I want on my doorsteps. That's the last thing I want my children, my nieces, my nephews, anyone, my neighbors, whether I agree with them politically or not, to see in this country. And the sad part is that you're hearing more and more of this contention throughout this country. So, Brett, let's talk about your new book, Convergence of Demons, if you don't mind.
We can't go into a lot of detail because I know there's some spoilers and stuff like that.
Yeah, we don't want to spoil it. I mean, you can go on the website and read a little bit, a little synopsis, a little brief cut of it. But tell us kind of like your inspiration. Is it part of your series? Is it going to be a series? I guess just kind of give our listeners and viewers out there what you see or what the book is about.
Well, Convergence of Demons is the sequel to Black Sunrise. And for those out there who are maybe halfway through Black Sunrise, it's doing very well on Amazon and audible.com. It's available as an ebook, a paperback, a hardback, and a audiobook narrated by George Woodall, who does most of the stuff for Daniel Silva. He did Alex Berenson, pretty much all the big dogs in the genre that I write in. I was very lucky to get George to narrate Black Sunrise.
That's kind of a cool story, though, isn't it? He kind of hounded him to do it.
Well, actually, I just reached out to him, and he said, I don't usually do first-time authors, and this is my first fiction publication. And he says, but send me 3 chapters, and I'll tell you if I'm even vaguely interested. And I felt a little bit of intimidation. I just sent him the whole book. He calls back a week later and he says he'd read the whole book, and he was extremely complimentary. And he was saying, really nice things to me, comparing me to Silva and Stephen Hunter and people like that. And but I spent, a long time working on that book, and I've been learning how to write all of my professional career, and I've been an avid fiction fan forever. But When he called back, he says, "I would love to do this book," and he put a lot of passion into it, and it's doing well.
Yep.
Just as an Audible book, but and a lot of people won't read a book; they want to hear on tape. So when Convergence of Demons comes out, it'll be in the same 4 formats. But the concept behind Convergence of Demons is the battle between this highly elite private investigation entity that's been around for a long time, operating in the shadows as a NGO, but a private military, private intelligence contracting agency. That organization falls under direct attack of the Soviet Bratvas and also the Italian mafia and the link between those two, which is called Hydrus. In Black Sunrise, there's backstory about how Rhodey Keenahan killed one of the senior members of Hydrus, and that led to trials on the national stage that basically shut down Hydrus. But Hydrus was a branch of the Krovopotlie Bratva, which is the Brotherhood of Blood, which is based on the Solzhenskaya Bratva, which is headed up in Russia by a guy named Semyon Milogovich in real life. And I wanted to change the story for some plot-driven reasons, but Brecht Group operatives all over the world are turning up dead. And there's a revenge process at work. And so this group has to deal with this. And it's a very large threat. And it turns out that Vladimir Putin himself is behind a lot of it because he had an axe to grind against the founder of the Brecht Group. Those who survived, and I don't want to spoil Black Sunrise, but not everyone in Black Sunrise survives. And the Kirkus Review said there's more than one unexpected death in this book. But it's designed as an extension of the basic plot concept, which is we have this very elite group, but it's different than the run-of-the-mill action figure heroes that you see with Mark Greaney. His character Court Gentry is really good, and there's a lot of other very similar books out there. There's the Orphan X books by Greg Hurwitz with Evan Smoke as the main character, and there's a whole bunch of these books out there, and they tend to be pretty similar. And I wanted my protagonist to be different, and that evolution really kickstarts in Convergence of Demons. And someone who's finished Black Sunrise probably can predict kind of where that may be going. But there's a lot of geopolitical explanation of threat vectors that are designed not to be erudite and boring, but also, plot driven and exciting, but also open people's eyes up to what some of this stuff really consists of. I put a huge amount of research into Convergence of Demons. There's no bioweapon in that book, but there's a threat of equal proportion in terms of the infiltration of various societies around the world by really organized crimes, the kind of thing that made the La Cosa Nostra and the Cardone family and so on and so forth look like nothing, look like child's play. Based on global infiltration, sheer numbers, and access to heavy money and heavy technologies.
So, Brett, as you're researching this and you're kind of diving deep in these organized crime groups, do you ever feel threatened, or like if I click on this wrong thing, or is there ever any time where you're like, man, like that you feel threatened with putting this information out and the other research that you've done?
Well, it's interesting. I went to a book signing several years ago with Daniel Silva at the Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver, and I asked him that question, and in a Q&A session, and his demeanor changed suddenly, and I felt bad about asking the question. But I said, you're writing a lot of negative stuff about some fairly cranky people out there, with Palestinian terrorist organizations and so forth. And his response is, well, I never talk about my security. But, with your training, you would have been able to spot the distinctive absence of security in that room. And the point is, I think every author worries about it. A lot of authors use a different name for Putin, and Petrov is the one that comes up the most often. It was in House of Cards and lots of other books. And I think people do that because they're concerned about painting Putin in a negative light and earning his ire. He doesn't give a crap about what some fiction writer in the United States is putting into spy novels. And I can tell you that the Baratvas, when the movie Eastern Promises came out with Viggo Mortensen, they paint the Russian mob in a kind of a really dastardly light. And I've read interviews that have been published online with senior Bratva members. They loved that movie.
It probably increased their street cred tenfold.
Yeah, and it gave them the glamour factor that they all want. So the answer to your question is no, I'm not worried about it. I'm not the only guy writing fiction novels that puts Putin and the mob in a negative light. The way I do it, I think, is utterly unique, but that's based on the depth of research I perform. But I don't fear for my safety because it just isn't that important. It's fiction. It says in the beginning of the book, this is fiction.
Gotcha.
And there's enough out there that paints the Russian government and the mob as uneasy bedfellows. So no, this isn't something I give serious thought to. And candidly, I think it may turn out that for the same reason that the Baratvas liked Eastern Promises as a movie, they may dig Black Sunrise. They may dig, Convergence of Demons. But I don't worry about my security because I just don't think I'm on anybody's radar other than readers who like to be entertained.
Gotcha. So when will Convergence of Demons, I know we talked this a little bit before the show, when do you think it'll be released? And will there be another audio version, or will there be an audio version as well?
Yeah, there will.
There will be an audio version. I'm in the last two chapters, and Black Sunrise had kind of a cool ending. It was very poignant. It was very emotional. I've had a lot of people tell me it brought them to tears. And so I want that to be sort of a hallmark. I want my books to have, really compelling endings. So as I mentioned before we went on, it's like tuning a guitar. You're kind of getting that last resonance into the final chapters. And I'm still not satisfied with those last two chapters. So, and I'm kind of a perfectionist. So I really want to get that just exactly right so it resonates the same way the end of Black Sunrise did. And once I have that done, we go through the editing phase. I have professional editors lined up. This book is self-published. I have had some conversations with various people about Black Sunrise was self-published, did extremely well on Amazon. But I think Convergence of Demons, I may end up entering into a contract with a publisher on that one. And their editorial process is different than my privately funded editorial process. So. But editing is the most important part of any book. And so I would estimate a couple more months at the least before Convergence is available. I'm a little behind schedule because pandemic threw my law firm into turmoil for a while, and I've been struggling to fight that off. And the firm's good now. Everybody in my firm's been vaccinated except for one person. And I've given him a waiver on his vaccine because his reasons for not getting vaccinated are deeply personal and well thought out to him. So anyway, that put me back a little bit. But one of the things I'm in Hawaii to do is finish the dang book.
Good. Well, we need to let you get back. We know it's super early, and we appreciate you getting up. If I said the crack of dawn, I'll be lying. Before the crack of dawn to join us. Great having you on the show. Great talking to you, getting your insight on, a multitude of things, and looking forward to your new book, Convergence of Demons. So if you can let our listeners and viewers know where they can find your book and you on social media, that'd be great.
Well, Jake, I'd like to thank you and Will both. Sometime under a more relaxed circumstance, I'd love to have a chat with you about your spec war training and experiences. I'm a trained shooter. I go to Gunsight a lot, train with Vickers and Latham and people like that. And I build my own 1911s. I was trained to do that by. Well, my military experience didn't involve boots on the ground, but I'd love to talk to you about your experiences sometime when it's a more relaxed format.
Absolutely.
Totally.
I think we'll share my email address with them and phone number. And Brett, of course, give me a call, text, email, whatever. I'll respond to you as soon as I can, and we'll definitely have a chat. So would love to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
It's been a real privilege to be on your show today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, and